If you want to get really good at rhythm guitar, one of the things you can do is learn to play the same chord in, say, 10 different places, 12, 15, I don't know, it doesn't matter. Just see how many you can find. For example, let's take a D chord. Of course, we've got our standard open chord shapes, and then we've got at least 2 standard bar chord shapes. Now we could do some inversion shapes. There's a good first inversion there. Second inversion with the root on the bottom string there. We could do it with the inversion on the bottom string. That's a D/F sharp, kind of like this one. And then let's see, we've got to know some triads. So we would want triads on the D, G, B strings. Maybe we would want triads on the high 3 strings. There's all of those. That one, what are we at now? I don't know. That's like 9, 10, I can't remember. It doesn't matter. But eventually then you'll want to find some really unique ways of playing certain chords too, especially common ones. And you can find unique ways that only the guitar can do. For example, I love how we can play chords, certain ones like D or A, and keep some of these open strings ringing while still moving up and down the fretboard on other strings. We're going to go over all these options here in this video, but first let's hear what it could sound like. That's a lot of different ways of playing just D and G and then a little bit of A near the end. And that's not even using any extensions of chords or alterations like sus2 or sus4. Those are just D, G, and A. So let's just pick D, and together we're going to go through all the Ds that I can think of right at this moment. Of course, we got cowboy D. We gotta know cowboy D, right? But we've got different cowboy Ds here. We could play this D. We could play commonly D/F sharp. It's just an inversion. It means F sharp is at the bottom. And sometimes I call this thumb D because that's just an easier way to remember it, right? But basically, it's just cowboy D. And then we're gonna have 2 standard bar chords. We always have 2 because we have one where we find the root on the A string. That's a D there, right? And since we found the root on the A string, we use the shape of A major and we play D major bar chord. And we could find the root of D on the low E string and play the shape of E major because the root's on the E, and we play D major bar chord like that. Okay, what are we at? We're like 1, 2, 3, 4 if you count that one, but let's just say 3. But let's talk inversions now. Like I said, an inversion is just the chord. It's still just root 3rd 5th, but the root might not be on the bottom. Because we had that bar chord there, and recently in a YouTube video and on Patreon, we did these first inversion Ds. These are so important if you want to sound any kind of Jimi Hendrix stuff, or especially in major pentatonic stuff, it's so good for that. Or Beatles stuff, Stone stuff, it's perfect. So that's first inversion because it has the 3rd on the bottom. If you go root 3rd, that's why we call that first inversion. Let's do second inversion. It's actually cool. It has the 5th on the bottom. This one's not played as often, but it's so easy to find this one. You might think, well, that's kind of hard to find. It's not hard to find. You could say it's close by, but not only that, it's really just the standard D bar chord, isn't it? Except I'm playing from the 5th there. So I don't need to hold the bar. I might just play it like that. We can connect them. We could have D bar chord. And we have 3 different Ds. That makes a measure of D or 2 measures of D really interesting. Okay, so what we got? We had 2 inversions there, so I don't know what we're at. We're at 5 now, let's say. We said we had this inversion. Let's call that one 6. But we also have a version here. It's kind of hard to reach just because it happens to be D, but it's there. It's also a D/F sharp. It's a great shape. I really like this shape, and hardly anyone ever uses it. Just to show you, let's change chords. Let's change to G just for a second, just so you can see where that is. Now you might say it's kind of a tough grab. It's not that hard, really. You get your fingers used to that. It's really cool sound. Okay, so what are we at? I think it's like 7 maybe, I'm not sure. Let's do triads. We want to make sure we have different sets of triads. We can use triads in rhythm guitar. We can use triads in solos. We can use the shapes for all kinds of cool things. But let's do the 3 triads quickly on the D, G, B string. So, I mean, we're staying on these 3 strings. There's 3 Ds. D would be D/F sharp because F sharp's the lowest pitched. D/A, the name doesn't matter as much. How do I know that's D? Because, right, we've done that before on our channel. That's a D bar chord we did earlier, and here's the triad. It's pretty easy to find. And there's the other D, the third one. There's always 3 triads, right? Root, third, fifth. We just flip them around. That's all we need. How do I know that's a D? Because that's a big D bar chord, and you can see, if you kind of see inside the chord, imagine the notes inside the chord, there's root, third, fifth there. So we have, that's very nice to have because we want to be able to play all these chords whenever we want them. So what are we at now? We're at like, I think 10, but let's do the triads on just the top 3 strings. That's a new one we haven't done yet. But the first one is so easy. If I only play the top 3 strings, I have cowboy D, right? Or this D, how do I know that's a D? Because again, this one just comes from a big bar chord. We just imagine it. There it is. What's the last one? Those are 3 Ds. The last one comes from? 2 of the triads always come from the 2 standard bar chords. So at least 2 of them are easy to find. So we got 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 maybe. Lucky 13. Okay. Now we've got open chord. We've got bar chord. We got some inversions. And we had other inversions down here. And we had triads. We had D, 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 and D, D, D. That's a lot of different chords. But let's not stop there because the guitar has a really unique advantage. For example, the fact that we have this D open string is hugely valuable when we're playing a bunch of D chords because we could move up the fretboard and we could keep that D open as a kind of drone, as we sometimes say. Now, if we really wanted to, and if we knew what's inside a D chord, root, third, fifth, that happens to be D, F sharp, A. A is the important one here. We have an open A string as well, so perfect. We could use, that is a cool chord. That's all just D chord, right? They sound really interesting because the formation of them, the combination of really low and higher notes is unusual. And even though there's no 7s, there's no sus2s or 9s, or there's no crazy notes in the chord, it's just root, third, fifth. But it sounds so neat. There's D, 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 D. Those are really unique, useful ones. If we put some sus4 on them, that's a cool sound, right? Very pretty. So we can alter those as well. Now, we've got a whole bunch of different ways of playing the same chords. And that's a bit of an exercise. We need to make sure that we put these things into context. Oh, and I should say we're going to have all the tabs from this video on our Patreon this week, plus some additional tips on how you can incorporate these kind of chords into your own rhythm guitar playing. The link to that is below. let's do a couple of examples. Let's do a simpler example. I'm going to do the key of A. We're going to change keys here. We're going to do the key of A, and we're just going to go 1, 4, 1, 4, 1, 4 in that key. Okay, so we have an A. We use open A chord. Sure. Where's my closest D? That's one of the things you can ask yourself sometimes. Rather than just going to the obvious choice, sometimes the obvious choice is the good choice, but sometimes the closest one is the good choice. And here we have that D triad that we did earlier. That's a D/F sharp. And remember, we can use the guitars to our advantage by remembering that some of these open strings can be included in the chord because they belong to the chord. This A note belongs to the chord. So I got A, and I'm going to go to the 4 chord, which is D, and I can keep that A underneath. Officially, that would be called a D/A, but yeah, same thing. Now let's go to the next A. I could play this one. Another one of my favorite, uniquely designed chords, if I could call that. You could think, well, it's the triad, right? But you can use the open A string with it. Right? You could think, well, it's a lot like that big A bar chord. Sure, it is, but this one's easier to play, and it just sounds cool there, right? So I got A, D, I got A, D. Where's the next A? It's the hardest one to find, but it's a good one. That's that triad shape again. I'm just using triad shapes here, by keeping the A on the bottom as my drone. And again, one more time, we're going to go to the 4 chord. Where's D? Ooh, so good. Put all those together, we have an incredibly simple chord progression. A, D, A, D, A, D. But it can sound really interesting. Instead of just being na 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 na. Maybe that's okay for some genres, but I like this. But it does sound really cool. So now, let's do a more complex version. This was the one that I kind of improvised there at the intro. We had a bunch of different chords. We had, what key were we in? We were in the key of D, right? So we were doing 1, 4, 1, 4 in the key of D a bunch of times. And then we had some 5 chord. We had an A in there as well. Start with just a cowboy D. Why not? Why not just start with the easy? Sometimes we can start with the obvious, and then we can get crazier from there. We want to build up the energy of a song anyway. So we could do D. Then let's do, instead of just doing cowboy G, I'm going to do a G/B in open position. Also, it's just so easy to play. You gotta be careful with your right hand. That sounds pretty good. Let's do this cool D we talked about. And hammer into it. There's a G triad. So we got D. And we got a D. There's a G there. What did I do after that? I just went to a standard D bar chord. They're still good. I'm not saying don't use them. Also, we got that cool stuff. And we can Keith Richards into the G chord. Triad, right? Let's do one more D and G, I think. I don't remember. There's that D we talked about. And we talked about we could use that unique benefit of the guitar by keeping that A string below it. Let's do a really fancy G. That's a very cool G because, again, I'm using a root G. And I'm not saying I would improvise this concept. I just kind of know this G and like it. I've memorized it. I know that all those notes are G, D, G, B. I have the essentials of a G chord. Now it sounds really good, right? Now let's go to the 5 chord. And again, sometimes we're going to ask ourselves, where is the nearest chord? Rather than just going to the obvious, 5 chord is A in this key, I'm going to go to the nearest one sometimes. And that would be that triad. And I can use the advantage of it being an A chord and keeping the A string below. Maybe I go down to that A. So I have a lot more movement on that A. And then what do we have after that? Oh yeah, G chord. Let's use another one of my favorite unique guitar chord. Again, G's are great because we have so many open strings for G chords. We actually have D, G, and B too if we want. But I'm going to put B on the bottom here. I'm going to have the A string blocked because we don't want that A string in this case. So I'm just going to block it with this finger. I'm going to have the open D, the open G, and I'll grab this G with my finger there. That's a pretty cool G chord, hey? So now I'm not saying that you can just make up these really unique chord shapes on the spot. Just pick a bunch that you like and start incorporating them into your playing. So what I do, I went up and then down. I'm just following, in this case, the bottom note is B, D, G. Guess what? Those are just notes of the G chord, right? G, B, D is a G chord, so that just goes B, D, G. And I'm just using the other higher note, there. That just goes G, A, D. Well, A is not in a G chord, but it sounds like a nice melody anyway. It works, it's in the key. And then I end with the good old D/F sharp because that G falling to that F sharp sounds really nice. Again, that's a nicer thing to have. The closest one is often the prettiest one, I think. We hear that movement, that little bit of movement, and yet we hear the harmonic change of the chord as well. So you put that all together again, it would sound something like this. More of this kind of rhythm guitar work, you could try out this video right here from our YouTube channel. My name is Blue Morris and I teach guitar lessons here in Vancouver on Patreon and YouTube, and I'll see you in the next one.